Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios on another beautiful rainy day in post-Hurricane Ian, Florida. I am joined once again from Atlanta by my friend and colleague, Joshua Henslee. Thanks so much for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
So much has been going on. I thought maybe we dive right in. You were appointed to the advisory board of Unbounded Capital, which is a VC in the kind of BSV space. Maybe for those who are unaware, I think there's more trickling awareness coming in. How does BSV differ from what everyone hears about called Bitcoin on the nightly news?
Yeah, so BSV is really an implementation of what the original Bitcoin protocol that was released back in 2009. So most folks aren't aware of this primarily because of the price run-ups of these different coins. But originally, Bitcoin had tons of smart contracting capability, had no arbitrary limits on transaction volume or anything like that, had very low fees. But as time went on, developers tinkered with it and ripped out a lot of different functionality, and they never restored it. Bitcoin SV has forked from that, and the SV stands for Satoshi's vision, which is really just implementing what Satoshi had from the beginning. There's still some differences, but those are trivial differences. They're not really impacting anything. But as a result, there's been massive scaling taking place, large blocks being mined, and fees have been pushed to very minute amounts, negligible amounts for people to be able to transact, build applications, move money around.
That's awesome. And this is what I've tried to convey because so many of the folks that I deal with, either kind of as professional investors in what's come to be called traditional finance on Wall Street, or just generally intelligent people who are, look at the markets, is that the original Bitcoin protocol, the white paper, was really about radical economic inclusiveness, right? And when people look at me like that, you raised it beautifully when we last spoke. Like if Visa charges 2.5% for a transaction, there's a rational lower limit to which is even worth bothering to use Visa for something, right? So, but if you are someone in the developing world and you can actually build a business on micro payments of 2 or 3 cents at a time, Bitcoin BSV allows that to happen.
Right.
You provide goods and services for 3 cents a pop. If you do that 1,000 times a day, that's a business for somebody.
Yeah.
But you can't do that with the kind of architecture we have now with MasterCard and Visa and the like. So that's encouraging. We're seeing more and more of, for Unbounded and for others, there's new competition. I just saw a lot of stuff in the space. So when you say people are building tools on BSV, like what kind of stuff are they looking to build? What's kind of are there major themes?
The primary app that I've seen implemented thus far are consumer applications. So social media, games, gambling, this sort of stuff. Those have been the dominant ones, and the dominant ones writing transactions to the ledger. So the one, actually, in my opinion, the top company in the space is called Haste Arcade, and they basically implement this concept called instant leaderboard payout, which is as if you were going to a physical arcade machine and you deposit, say, a quarter. Instead of the machine just eating that quarter as pure revenue for the arcade, what happens is they take that quarter, and they do take some of it themselves, but due to the micro payment capability, they actually split that with the people on the leaderboard. So if you were the top scorer on Pac-Man, for example, you get 10% of that quarter. So you get 2.5 cents, for example. And they have various tiers that you can play, and it's instant. That's what I mean, is when you deposit it, there's no waiting for 30 days or 60 days for it to hit your bank account. You get that money as soon as that person hits the play button. And and they have various leaderboards. Some of the leaderboards have as many as 100 players, and that dime or penny is split that many times proportionally based off their spot on the leaderboard.
Right. That's cool. So if you're number 2 on one of those fun games, you're not retiring, but you might be getting $80 a week for hanging out and playing a game. That's fun.
Yeah, there's one guy in there who dominates, and he's made hundreds of dollars there. They haven't hit the scale to where someone could probably sustain, but as their metrics are positive. Their user numbers are growing. They're doing more marketing, so I think the future is very bright for them.
That's interesting. It'll be what I will find fascinating is kind of the behavioral finance aspect of that, right? Because if you're playing and there are 500 people in your game, you're pretty good. the chances are pretty high that you're going to be net positive on this thing.
Right.
Maybe the $2 to $7, whatever, right? But the moment there become 80,000 people all vying for the top 10 spots, then it becomes more like a lotto.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to see how or if that affects behavior,
Right.
because a lot of this is around the maturation of these kind of quote unquote crypto markets are beginning to map what boring old Wall Street clowns like me have seen forever, right? How do you divide value? How do you interpret equity valuations? How do you know all that sort of stuff? And I think, from my perspective, I'd love to get yours if you're kind of closer to the crypto side of this. You know, so many of the errors being made in classical central banking, especially since 2007, almost scream out for a decentralized revolution for the people to take back how we talk about money, how we talk about value. Is that kind of a key theme that you see for the folks who are looking to invest in this space?
I think that was the case primarily with the BTC version of Bitcoin. That was previously the case, but somehow that narrative has morphed, mutated into this one about digital gold and non-inclusiveness, as you alluded to earlier, right?
Right.
Because the transaction fee is so high, the price is also so high that really, I mean, you've actually had people that support that version of Bitcoin. One of the guys, he had a C-level position at Blockstream, which was one of the development companies. He straight up said Bitcoin is not for people that live on less than $2 a day. He said
Right.
that, which is completely the opposite of what the creator said about his invention in the white paper. One of
Right.
the first sentences in there is you can't do casual payments on the internet. Obviously, he foresaw this as a micropayment system, yet you have them changing the narrative. So originally, yes, when Bitcoin first came out, the people that supported it were very aware of the issues with central banking and the Federal Reserve, and went so far as they were wanted to end the Fed. They wanted to replace it, but
Sure.
now you have them actually pandering and begging them to stop raising rates because it's crashing the price, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, it goes back. Have you seen that Peter Schiff video where he goes and talks to people at that in what was that movement back in it was after the financial crisis. It was Occupy Wall Street.
Oh yeah, God, those clowns. Yeah.
Well, Peter Schiff went there and he interviewed people there, and
Right.
it was fascinating. And those guys, they had that sentiment that you just said. They saw the issues and they wanted to change it.
Right.
And that was present in the Bitcoin space, but now it's gone. That's gone because now they're cheerleading if say
Oh,
Goldman
sure.
Sachs.
And what's so
Yeah,
great about that is there's nothing new under the sun, right? If you've got nothing and you're looking to get something, you are a crazy risk taker. The moment you have it, you want every all innovation to stop, and this is good right now. Thank you.
yeah.
Yep. It's been hilarious to watch because I was offered a role. Never forget this. Offered a role with a very prominent fund out on the West Coast that got into Bitcoin, and I went and sat with them. And I respect the guys. I respect their understanding, but to me, Bitcoin was always in and of itself worth zero. Valuable protocol. It's like telling me like electrons are worth. It never made any sense to me, ever. Um, and then they posted. I remember they posted like 125,000% returns once, and I was sitting there thinking, well, I'm an idiot. Like, I mean, clearly, but I go back to Julian Robertson. I don't know, you might be too young to remember him. Julian Robertson ran the Tiger Fund, the original one, years ago, and he was a huge star. He made a huge amount of money in mutual funds for equities for people. And in 2000, he kept going short all these stupid .com stocks because none of them made any sense. And he had to close the fund. I think it was the Millennium Fund, if I remember correctly. He had to close the fund after 3 successive quarters of losses because he was going short because that was rational. And then the quarter after he shut down his fund, of course, the .com crash happened. He was proven right. So what?
Right.
Timing is everything in this world. And so should I have ridden the goofy Bitcoin price for 6 years? Apparently I should have. But I'm looking smarter now. Anyway, but fundamentally, I mean, I see a huge amount of value in sort of the application that you're talking about, because all the fake money that has plumped asset returns and it's the end the Fed. I mean, Ron Paul wrote a great book Rand Paul, I forget which one, and the Fed. It was about that, right? Is that the Federal Reserve is itself oddly not actually a central bank, which most people don't understand, and it was set up by the major banks to basically protect their asses in the case of things went sideways, and it has worked a treat for the members of the Federal Reserve community, and it has been not so great for everybody else.
Right.
They have built-in theft in this form of inflation built into how they operate their models. They call it acceptable inflation. Americans should call it acceptable theft, but they do it all day long. So, for folks coming kind of new to this or seeing it from a different perspective, do you see an entire parallel ecosystem where the dollar becomes quasi irrelevant?
I don't. I think they'll kind of, because I don't believe government will ever really relinquish that type of control. So it's hard to say. This is a very hot topic and something I go back and forth on, but I think it'll be parallel systems, especially if we see something like a central bank digital currency implemented. I can see a lot of people refusing to participate in such a system. And, frankly, in my opinion, barter is superior than going into something like that. I mean, some people will, folks that don't know about this stuff will probably just accept it. But I think because of what's happened with Bitcoin, even though it's been malformed and with all these different coins, people still kind of are aware that this CBDC thing is bad. So I think that will ensure that we have at least have two parallel systems. The thing is, I think they might have issues with scalability. So something that is possible is that they end up actually using a scalable blockchain to do the CBDC on top of. So that could happen, but I think we're years away from something like that.
And what so for those who aren't paying close attention, that's a central bank digital currency. So the Fed would offer a digital dollar, which arguably they do now, which I find so hilarious. Like, what is the Fed creates dollars now by sending electrons to banks at an interest rate. So it's a digital dollar now. And the difference, of course, is you can track wallets and control things. But again, I think a lot of that's overblown right now. As anyone who has bothered to not pay the IRS for a while will find out, magically you go to your JP Morgan account, there's no money in it. So there's already a lot of governmental control, right? You're
Right.
absolutely right that a complete system completely separate from government will be hard to maintain. But I'm curious to see. I had Chris Giancarlo on talking about that. The precursors were already before this PayPal kerfuffle about this nonsense of $2,500, which I think is one of the best lies ever. I love that. I love the fact that everyone's like, that's viable, and it made sense. And because of the conditions big tech have set, rational people were ready to believe that was totally a thing PayPal would do. Right? Very funny. But PayPal did already give an implication of what a CBDC could look like, in that they decided what you're allowed to buy. Right? Like, I can't go buy ammunition with PayPal. Well, it's not an illegal product. Why can't? What do you mean I can't buy it? Why? Because you just don't like it, right? So there's a Sharia compliant CBDC. Can I not buy pork and pornography and tobacco? I mean, what am I going to do on Saturday, right? So it's curious to see how much values that are extraneous to economic transactions can get buried in. And what are the other big kind of things that you guys are, folks in the community, the VCs looking at these projects, and what are the big overarching macro things that you guys look at that are worrying to you?
For me, it's really it's the government's term of inflation, which is rising prices, right? Because in reality, Bitcoin from 2008, 2009 has never seen sustained interest rates above 0%. And now we have that for the first time ever. Yeah, we had it in 2018, but that was like 6 or 9 months or something before they pivoted and went back to zero. So what is Bitcoin going to do in that type of environment when you actually have rising rates? Since the kind of greater crypto crash happened earlier in May of this year, we haven't really seen it be impacted by these rising rates. I think that it's going to continue to tank the prices to the degree where people will start to see, okay, a lot of this stuff is garbage. Which one of these actually works? And I actually did a video recently about this. The question becomes, you know, all these digital currencies are highly speculative, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
have literal coins named Shiba Inu, Doggy Coin, Poop, going to the moon, so to speak.
Right.
These things have no utility. It's all speculation, right?
Yeah.
Arguably driven by the 0% rates caused by the Fed in the first place.
Mm.
So now that that goes away, folks are going to have to look into this space and say, which of these coins can I actually do something with that's irrelevant, that's regardless of the price?
Mm.
Because if BTC goes down, what's the use case, right? There's no use case for it. If BSV goes down, you have all these companies that are built on top of it. There is a floor price there because you have businesses actually needing it to run their
Sure.
business.
There's really utility. They're doing stuff with it, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I actually kind of made a troll video called "All Cryptos to Zero, BSV to $5." Because if the
Love
Fed
that.
keeps if the Fed keeps raising rates,
Yeah.
then that's what's going to happen. Is I mean, I'm sure you're going to have other cryptos that do have economic activity, preserve value,
And
but
it's
a lot of these,
interesting. It's interesting to see the correlation between Fed rates and crypto. Is that because so much of this has been all based on staking and loaning it to one another, and everyone's passing this around. And really, you ever read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy
no.
with Douglas Adams? Totally worth it. Anyway, in it, it's set in it's modern day Earth, probably 30 years ago actually. But we are contacted by people, so we are not alone in the universe, right? There's an entire culture, universal culture out there, far more sophisticated than we are. Long and short of it is, at one point they crash land on prehistoric Earth, and the idiots there are deciding that leaves are currency. So they're basically taking leaves off trees and shoving them in their pockets, and then they do come to realize much that an excess of monetary supply leads to inflation. So in order to increase the value of the leaves in their pockets, they embark on a massive program of deforestation. Of course, it's an absurdist view, but that's the point, right? Is that there's no inherent value to any of this stuff. And I've been saying it for years about Andy Warhol, which makes art collectors very angry. Like, if a lot of millionaires hadn't bought Andy Warhol and told each other it's worth a lot, it would be worth what it is, which is zero, right? He didn't do anything. He had assistants while he was stoned, silk screen pictures of Campbell's soup cans on canvases. Clever for a dorm room poster, but $4 million at auction is ridiculous. But again, that's my fundamental view. I don't have to buy it. Similarly, for a lot of these nonsense coins, unless they have some real utility, it's all been a fun game, and it's going to be an historical footnote. So,
Right.
well, of course, you say that you're goring a lot of oxes of people who, quote unquote, are really really rich right now. But
Yeah.
until they can turn those nonsense coins into dollars, it's all theoretical.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what this whole space is predicated on, is that no one actually cares about these assets. They care about the fiat amounts they're worth, which again goes back to, that really drives home the point I made earlier, which is how did we go from something to want to make society better by pushing up against the Federal Reserve to, oh, actually we're begging them to help us so our asset price doesn't continue to crash.
Right. Well, human nature is how we got there. So when the great, the shakeout comes, I think it's going to be kind of like the dot-com crash that I lived through in 2001, right? Those fundamental business models that actually people derive value from will continue and thrive and grow, and those that were just goofy ideas will be, chuckle. Like,
Yeah.
you remember commenting on MySpace about the Super Bowl ad for Pets.com? So that's interesting. What if you had any key advice aside from get out of all these ridiculous coins because they themselves are not assets worth anything? And I ask you a question because I don't know. I've heard this guy Peter Schiff's name. I don't know who he is. But I saw something. I accidentally maintained a Twitter account. I didn't mean to, but I was on it the other day, and I saw some people screaming back and forth at each other. Right, and I love it when you observe a fight that means nothing to you, and some clown is yelling that Bitcoin's a commodity, and someone's yelling it's a security, and frankly, it's neither. So I'm kind of fascinated. Can you elucidate what are these idiots howling about?
Um, the argument that it's a security, I think, is not valid because it was just put out there. It wasn't sold. It wasn't created for an investment vehicle. It was something created to do something, which is facilitate micropayments to solve the issue of online commerce, because we don't have it. We don't have payment protocols on the internet. They exist, but there's no actual coin. As far as a commodity, yes, I've heard people mention that they don't believe Bitcoin is a commodity. Craig Wright, who I believe is Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator, has said that it is cash, and he believes that it is a commodity. His justification for it was that because you need it to actually interact with this ledger, this global ledger. So you need it to pay for data to write to the chain. That's his justification for it. He has some other ones that I haven't dug into, but you know, he looks at it more. My understanding is that he looks at it more like a silver, where okay, yes, people give value to it, but but it has a usage. It has a core usage. People use it in product to do whatever, or jewelry, whatever. And that is true for Bitcoin, because if you were use it as not a payment, you need it to write to the ledger, which, I mean, that's a valid use case. A lot of these companies are writing data to the chain, whether it's order data, logs, immutable logs, that sort of thing, time stamping. So I believe it is a commodity, but I can understand how people are struggling to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, I'd have to, having spent my career in commodities, I'd have to spend a lot of time thinking about that, because that, by that definition, binary code is a commodity. I mean, you begin to define things in terms of if it's useful for something, it's commodity, then everything's a commodity.
Yeah.
So to the extent that that's true, that's kind of like a non-statement. Okay, I get it. But it matters to folks like me because, you know, we're issuing an NFT tied to real world physical commodities, you know, rare earths, critical minerals. And that becomes a regulatory distinction, right? And so the CFTC will be able to regulate futures contracts of commodities listed on exchanges. They don't regulate OTC contracts. So I think some of that fight has got to be about regulatory impact, right? If I allow you to call it a commodity, then I'm trapped in this regulatory regime. It's certainly not a security. What's the, you know, the security is a title to something that's underlying. It's not that. Huh. So what else is on your mind? What else is incredibly important that everybody should pay attention to?
Well, the thing I think is, I actually had a guest on my channel recently to discuss some of the stuff going on in the bond market, and he had a different take on what the Fed's doing, and the feedback has been really interesting. I learned a lot from that conversation, but it's really driven by the interest rate spiking in the different bond markets in different countries. So, I mean, I think it's incredible what we're seeing right now. I mean, the Treasury rate in the U.S. averaged somewhere around 4%, which I've never seen it that high. Because I mean, I'm young. I'm a youngin.
Yes, I remember when it was 14%. So,
and you see what Bank of England what is doing with the pensions. They're having to basically get in there and suppress the rates because it's going out of control. So I keep seeing that people are sounding the alarm, saying there's going to be carnage because this is going to impact equities, which it has. But we haven't seen like a meltdown yet. But a lot of people think this is going to happen. I think that's probably true, given how the market just seems like it wants to fall off a cliff. And what I'm trying to understand is, how does this impact the crypto space? Because I think it's just going to hammer it even worse than, say, stock market stuff, because of the lack of utility there. So I think it's a fascinating paradigm that we have going on right now.
If it's helpful, I saw a part of that interview with a bright guy. I think if it's helpful, markets are rational until they're not, and things are not correlated until they are. And part of what that means is, because I lived through the last crash, which is all, and it's actually this book, actually by Peter Wallison, Bad History, Worse Policy. If you allow politicians to set the narrative about what happened, then, as he says in Bad History, Worse Policy, if you let them misdiagnose what happened, you know, I have employees constantly younger, and I tell them that there are at least 3 areas in human nature, in human existence, for which absolute acceptance of objective reality is critical: Buddhism, alcoholism, and finance. Right? If you don't accept reality, you're fixing the wrong problem, right? If your problem is you're a drunk, but you think it's I wake up late, and my boss doesn't like me. Now, you're fixing the wrong problem. You're waking up late and your boss doesn't like you because you drink too much. And similarly, when we the Dodd-Frank Act and the crash of 07, 08, all of that was caused by government intervention in the housing market. All of it, right? But the politicians and media got into lockstep the second it happened, and they all got the exact same cue cards, which read greedy bankers, right? And all the Occupy Wall Street, I mean, I go on and on about that nonsense. The idiot that founded Occupy Wall Street was in the University of Chicago anthropology department with me. He was a lunatic and an idiot and a commie jackass then. And so then I lived right downtown by Zuccotti Park. So these idiots impacted my daily life. And when I found out that he was behind it, I was like, you got to be kidding me. This putz will not leave me alone. Anyway, story for another day. But because the media and everyone in Congress, they deliberately, Bill Angelides, this Democrat hack in California, was appointed by Obama to look at the commission. They lied. They just lied. They lied entirely about it, right? Structured finance and derivatives, blah, 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 all this crap had nothing to do with the crash. Nothing. So because they misdiagnosed it, we then got the Dodd-Frank Act, which addressed a problem which never existed in the first place and was a laundry list of every leftist Democrat's wet dream about what they wanted to do to the capital markets. And the damage continues, right? The damage continues. And so my main headache is we're going to see more economic dislocation, but it all goes back to the exact same root cause, which is governmental interference in capital markets, because you can only distort things so long before they explode.
Right.
And so to the extent the bond market is going to have an impact, or the equities market has been pointlessly fluffed since 08. There's no reason on earth. And if interest rates were objectively, empirically reported on rather than decided by the Fed, we would have a more smoothly functioning economy. And that was the whole point of end the Fed. But you're asking entrenched people in power to give up being important, and no one likes giving up being important, and they also don't like being told they've lived a lie. When Ben Bernanke just got a Nobel Prize in economics, it made me remind the world that Alfred Nobel did not create a prize in economics. He didn't think it was a science. That was created later. Anyway, that's my rant. But in response to sort of, if that's helpful, these markets are so dislocated by government randomly putting its thumb on the scales with no rhyme or reason. Whenever a politician happens to be in power at the time, he gets to do it. And is that sort of in keeping with what your other guests have been talking about, or is it sort of a different view on the same sort of headache?
Yeah, it was the same basis, kind of, really, that their action has that basically the economy cannot accept higher rates, that so much damage is going to be caused. But these rates are paltry. Right? Like you said you lived through 14%. I remember our real estate agent, he's like, I've sold houses when there's 0% rates. I've sold mortgages when they're 18%.
Just the price.
Yeah. So
but the flip side to rates being bad for the economy is, who says you used to put money, when I was a kid, you put money in your savings account and you made 6%.
I read a book. This is one of my favorite books. It was about budgeting. I forget the exact name of it, but it changed how I looked at, doing monthly spending. And it was written in 2007. And I read it, I believe, in 2014 or 2015. And he wrote in there, yeah, you can put your money in a savings account and get 5%. I was like, what the hell is he talking about?
Right. That used to be normal, right?
Yeah.
And you got to wonder, because if Citibank is charging their credit card customers 18.5%, and it's giving their savings customers 0.01%, who's getting all that spread?
Right.
It ain't you, right?
Yeah.
And so the every attempt the government makes to regulate a market, they just provide, first off, all these rules are written by the industries that they're supposedly going to regulate, so they gamify it. And no amount of regulators, they will tell you this. It's an unfair fight, right? If the SEC can hire 50 smart lawyers, they should hire statisticians, but they don't. Anyway, just take away the titles. If they hire 50 smart people to regulate bad market behavior, right? One hedge fund can spend more money on brilliant PhDs figuring out how to game their rules.
Yeah.
And so there's this horrible push and pull where if you allowed radical transparency so people understood what was being charged, right? You used to have to care. Prior to the FDIC, prior to the Great Depression, where the government decided to guarantee your deposits as a retail investor, you actually had to pay attention as if you were an equity investor, if you were putting your money in a bank. Right? And that's why big banks that have been there a long time aggregated assets, and why Jimmy and Johnny, I got a fun idea for a bank Inc. got no money, because you might lose it all. If you make bad loans, the money's gone. There's no government insuring it. And every step the government has taken has divorced people from taking responsibility for economic reality with consistently disastrous results. And every time people are asked to vote for more freedom and less protection, the sheep will vote for less freedom.
Right.
And I don't know how you change that dynamic, honestly. I really don't.
Yeah. The question I have for you is, so, because back to what I was saying, is that's my biggest question going forward. So I think the reason that equities and crypto even have not just fallen off that cliff is because I think there's still an expectation that the Federal Reserve is going to do what the Bank of England did and pivot. Basically, because they're seeing all these things all this carnage happening, right? Like what's happening in England.
Sure.
And, you have funds having issues, lots of layoffs, rising unemployment, that sort of stuff. And inflation's not reduced. Their rising prices definition is not coming down. They think that the Fed is going to, okay, we're going back to 0%, which would obviously rally everything again, like it did last year in 2021. Do you think that's going to happen?
I don't know. Well, I think there are two fundamental differences in the UK and the US equity market. First off, we've got a much bigger, more diversified economy and more resilient. And unlike cryptocurrencies, there's real value there, right? I mean, when in 07, 08, I had a gleeful time as the world fell off a cliff. And, I think I bought GE shares at $3. They'd been at 150, 8 months before. And so what I said earlier about kind of everything's correlated until it's not, and the rest of it, like part of the stupidity of the 07, 08 crash was, and I lectured on this at law schools in terms of bankruptcy classes, was that there's always been this concept of mark to market, right? As an asset manager, you have to mark your book to market, right? And if I own a share of stock that my fundamental analysis tells me is worth $98, but it's trading in the market at $72, well, from my analytical standpoint, that's a buy signal. I'm going to keep buying that stock until 91 because I think it's fundamentally worth 92. So it's a profit fee. But that's different conceptually, right? That's my fundamental view of the value of that company and what I'm willing to pay for it. And the market may or may not ever agree with me. And that's where the efficient markets hypothesis is ridiculous because, and it especially became true in that example with GE, right? GE's business did not fundamentally change because of the financial crisis at all. They're an industrial concern, a multi-diversified conglomerate, right? So did they take a little bit of a hit? Yeah. But did they take a hit worthy of $150 down to $3? No, right? But that's the irrationality of inefficient markets, meaning, and it's a great example, right? So why I came up in bankruptcy class, so I'm very, very quick. I own 10 stocks, all on leverage, right? For whatever reason. The world falls apart. Nothing about these companies has changed, but the world's in a panic. And banks start tightening margin requirements, start making cash calls. So I have to actually give cash against my positions. Well, I'm fully invested. So I have to start to sell equities to get cash to pay off my margin requirements. Very simplistic example. But you can see how that becomes a self-reinforcing downward spiral. As everybody does that, even though literally nothing about these companies' operations has fundamentally changed at all. We're all facing extrinsic calls on our portfolios that have nothing to do with the companies, but they force us to sell the equities, which makes the price go down. So we're going to see something similar here. We are seeing something similar like that. But at the end of the day, there is dry powder in the world, like Warren Buffett and old clowns like me who keep some cash because the prices go up. I'm like, I'm just going to wait. And eventually, there are buyers for every market. The danger is that no rule always works. So that mark-to-market rule, which was set up so that people couldn't lie to investors. They couldn't say, I own all these equities and I value them here, so that's how I'm going to report them. Well, you're not allowed to do that, right? The way it works is the market says they're here, you have to report them there. So there's a difference between fundamental value and what the market says. And that's a main difference, right? So your example of the Fed, moving rates around, that's sort of a macro club they use and move stuff around. But for fundamental investors, they're delighted. Like when that crap happens and rates, shoot up and prices drop, the reason there's eventual floor to that is like rational buyers step in. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but the more fundamental investors there are and the more diversity of opinion there is amongst buyers and sellers, the more you get to a rational price. We'll never collapse because these companies operate. They're throwing off dividends. Someone's paying the same dividend that was basically a 2.8% yield yesterday, and it's suddenly a 9% yield. I mean, I'm borrowing money to buy that stock.
Right.
Is that a helpful answer?
It is. I guess my point is that in 2020, with the whole March situation,
Yeah,
they did crash about 40%, but the Fed actually stepped in, and for some reason, while everyone was at home, everything rallied
right.
past the previous highs and
Oh, that
continued.
was just a flood of money. Right?
Yeah.
That was a monetary phenomenon. Exactly. This flooded money in. And so all of a sudden I had more money and I had to put it to work. And so I put more into my mutual fund, and the mutual fund manager got the money, and then he went and bought more of the same stocks he bought, and the price went up. Yeah. Oh, all of that. Again, one more governmental distortion. They should never shut the economy. They certainly didn't need to send people random checks without any reason.
That helped too. I mean,
all of it. Oh, it's just a flood of money drives up prices. Inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. Just put that on your gravestone with Milton Friedman, right? It always the same exact amount of goods and services exist on day one. You double the money supply. You now double the willingness of people to pay for that exact same good and service a day later. Now the price is doubled. Not brain surgery, yet it seems elusive to the nutcases in Washington.
So I think the difference, unlike the when the 2008 stuff happened, there were decently high rates before they went down to zero again. I guess that's my thing is this time different, meaning that the rates are not going to go back down.
Yeah, hopefully they won't go back down, because they've got to hold the line. I mean, otherwise you get to another Paul Volcker who is going to set T-bill rates to 19%, finally kill inflation. Inflation should remain at zero. The very fact that these snake oil salesmen managed to sell everyone the comforting illusion, oh, inflation's running between 1.8 and 2%. We're very happy with that. I'm not happy with that. You're stealing 2% from me per year. I'm not happy at all with that. That sucks, right? And they talk about deflation like it's the worst thing on earth. Deflation is awesome for those of us who are prudent with our money.
Right.
Phenomenal. Great stuff. Nothing wrong with it, right? So it is a huge fight. And has been going on for years, about sound money advocates versus monetarists. I always have to say this whenever it comes up. Any university that gave anyone any degree in what's called modern monetary theory should instantly be stripped of their accreditation. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And the number of people walking around saying modern monetary theory, that's called Weimar Germany. I don't know what you're babbling about. No, we could just print it. We'll just send more electrons to your bank account. Yeah, that's called inflation. And the fact they stand there and like look into a camera and say, no, you're just not getting it. Yeah, I'm getting it. I'm getting it just fine.
Yeah. So another question is my guest Famal, he made the point that we might be heading towards deflation because of the rising rates. That even though there's been tons of money printed by government in from 2020 to 2022, that because the rates are rising and you're seeing people flocking to cash, this whole idea of the relative dollar strength, right? Like you have yen. I mean, the yen's cratering. I know because my wife's Japanese, and she's not very happy about that. And then,
Fair enough.
The euro. I've never seen the euro this low in my lifetime.
Yep.
Same thing with the pound.
Yeah.
So and that's actually makes sense to me because you're not seeing commodities like gold or silver rise. Gold was higher in 2021. It hit
Yep.
its all-time high when you had all that money printing. But now that everyone accepts that we have inflation, those they're actually going down. So
Yep.
I find that interesting, and that kind of tells me, well, maybe the the idea that there's a bunch of money out there isn't necessarily true because these rates are taking down the leverage. So the amount of money in the system is not as much as people thought. And I've been
Hmm.
thinking about that the last 48 hours, and I think that makes a lot of sense based off
Hmm.
how people are acting in the markets.
That's interesting. I would say everything fits into context, though. I think some of the major differences are, A, I've dealt with gold bugs my entire life. They are a degree more sane than QAnon. Just like their inherent, if gold were inflation adjusted, it would be like $89,000 an ounce now. Like it's just not. So everyone can relax. Um, one of the main headaches we've got is that the U.S. is unique. So from '08 to 2011, right? Again, this is how they get away with this because except for horrendous, finance guys and policy wonks, no one notices, right? So the Fed monetized the debt for years, every quarter. So most Americans have no understanding of this, that the U.S. Treasury held their usual Treasury auctions of notes, 5-year bonds, 10-year, right? And in sometimes like up to 95% of the purchases made at that auction were purchased by the Federal Reserve. That is literally using your Visa card to pay off your MasterCard to pay off your American Express card. Eventually, you've run out of credit, but we didn't run out of credit because of the world's reserve currency. We could keep issuing a new credit card. The Chinese are poised to turn the renminbi into another reserve currency. The moment the world accepts another reserve currency, we are Greece. This country is the official debt is $32 trillion. When you add up state, municipal, and federal obligations, promises made to people without any way to pay for it, it's closer to $140 trillion. This nation is bankrupt. Bankrupt. There is no question about that. And the problem is the longer this goes on, the more everyone thinks it's okay. But when the bill comes due and inflation catches up with the true value of the dollar, you're going to find out that a loaf of bread is $900 and your home heating bill is $47,000 a month. And everyone's suddenly poor. Just ask what happened to middle-class pensioners in Athens a few years ago. They went from middle-class pensions to impoverished. Nothing changed except the value of their assets went to nothing. And we're in deep trouble, and everyone's still woohoo whistling and worrying about what Kanye says on Twitter. I would say it's madness, madness. I don't know what the solution is. I hope some adults get into power shortly. The best we can hope for is gridlock in November. But the willingness to just spend money, it's not even spend money that we forced our great grandchildren to borrow from the Chinese at this point. It's now money that is completely illusory and will never be paid off except in massive inflation. So not a hopeful sign, but I would love to think that things like human. I'm always a fan of human ingenuity. I'm always a fan, right? The Green Revolution enabled us to feed 10 billion people on the planet. Drives the Malthusans and some people on the left crazy that we can actually feed all these people and the world isn't going to die. So are we able to do the same thing? Are we going to have Star Trek replicators? They're going to put protein chains together and everyone's going to have yummy lattes and eggs every morning? That'd be nice. Could be, right? Not technologically impossible. So maybe we're getting there. Maybe we're going to be so broke we have to innovate our way to completely equal communism. What do you think?
So given all that, where do people go? Like where because I've heard some folks say commodities, but you
Right.
seem to be anti-gold.
Yeah, but commodities for sure. Like anything that's a real asset will hold value because, if you buy the piece of land today and it grows corn, there's a great example in Adam Smith going back to, he gave the example of I think one of the Cambridge universities that took a grant or a loan from a farmer half of the rent was to be paid like 8 shillings a year, and the other half was to be paid in 1,000 bushels of corn, wherever it was. Well, of course, over 100 years, the 8 shillings became pointless, but the bushels of corn maintained their value, right? So if you can invest in things that are real assets that produce real things, yeah, you're always going to have somewhat of an inflation hedge, because the prices are going to go up, the prices are going to go down, but you're going to have something to sell that is real in real time that you can pay off other real bills with. So, I'm not entirely pessimistic, because humans tend to muddle through. But I just hope that the government stays out of the way. No more zero interest. The very fact I've written a book that's coming out shortly. In fact, it's about central banking, and it contains the proposition that there's no reason for central bankers to sit around like masters of the universe playing Dungeons and Dragons and setting interest rates, right? Observe them. Everything from the loan shark in the corner willing to give you 20% on the arm to, the Publix, which will let you buy on credit for 2% a year. Yeah. Observe the rates the market has and report them and let people make a decision. The price of money is a price like any other. We don't let the government set the price of bread, because that's disastrous. Why do we let them set the price of money?
Yeah.
And that is something powerful that things like BSV and what I like about a lot of these innovations is they are mediators of value, freely decided, with no governmental intervention. And that's the power, I think. I mean, that's where such great stuff can happen. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons I came into it, because I started doing this research about Fed and inflation and all that in 2018, and that that run up in BTC, or 2017, and that run up in Bitcoin BTC caught my attention. And when I looked into it, I said, oh, okay, I have a payments background, and it just solves so many fundamental issues with online payments. And yeah, the nature of it, that it is truly owned. It's not a debt instrument. It wasn't, there's a fixed supply, which some people have a problem with, but truly the units, I mean, there's 1 quadrillion Satoshi. So that's way more than money, than the existence of money. So I don't think that's a problem, at least not right now. And you could do derivatives on top of Bitcoin. So, right. So yeah, I think, people actually having control of the money, being able to send it without the third party, I mean, it's crucial, because the government, in my opinion, has no right to be telling people how they can and cannot transact. And to bring that full circle, PayPal, I mean, I'm surprised they've made it this long.
Yeah.
I think they've done a great job of riding the narrative. To me, Bitcoin eviscerates something like PayPal. And I think it will. I mean, we're heading towards that. Them coming out with that silly announcement, I mean, that's going to do nothing but be negative for them. So I expect more of that clown type of behavior to continue. And as we move forward, I hope you're right that we have more fundamental investors come in, because even though we have this wild economic environment, I think BSV as is probably underpriced significantly. But what's it going to take?
Never have a price in and of itself. I mean, I guess the dollar is a price too. So I mean, I kind of guess that kind of makes sense. But it's to me, it's just a fundamental enabling protocol. But because the argument is that you actually have to own a few of them to transact, that's why it's got a utility. Okay, I think that makes sense.
Right. And
we'll see. If the government stays out of the way, one last example, right? I mean, it has been. I quote Lewis Black, who says, the government lies to be uncomfortable with that. They do that all the time. That's fine, right? But as long as it's sort of like quotidian lies, I don't care. But like the sweeping epic lies have become so outrageous, right? I mean, I work in the oil and gas industry. My colleagues and partners are in the oil and gas industry, right? And the aside from shutting off the pipeline, which made no sense, to slow rolling and denying, like they gave out 300,000 acres in drilling permits in 18 months, when the normal amount's like 8.5 million acres in the same period of time for like the last 10 administrations, right? And they sit there and try to claim like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, we're not doing anything different. It's so egregiously pointless. The lies have gotten so big, and the pain at the pump is huge. And John Kerry, when the Russians are busy bombing maternity hospitals, like, I really hope it'd be better if they club babies to death with sticks because of the carbon emissions. I mean, it's just bizarre. the preoccupations of the ruling class are what made Tulsi Gabbard leave the Democrat Party yesterday, right? She's, and I remember my grandfather was a union man in New York, and the greatest, curse you could make to a union man was, I bet you vote Republican. You get your ass kicked for that in New York in the 40s, right? But he would be a Republican today because the Democrats are worried about gender pronouns and don't give a shit. The working man is, paying $6 for a gallon of the pump. It's bizarre. We live in an inverted universe, and so we'll see. I don't know. I think November will be fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, what do you think is going to happen with all this talk of energy crisis? Is that legitimate, or are people fear mongering?
No, this is very serious. This is ridiculous. We will have, well, the crisis is here, right? I was paying $1.89 for gas in January of 2021, and suddenly it spiked to $5, and that's in Florida.
Right.
Keep the taxes low, right? Look, $10 in California. It's madness. I think that the crisis is here. I mean, I was in England when both the Queen died and the Prime Minister came in, just coincidentally, and the answer to lowering energy costs in Great Britain is to increase oil and gas production in the North Sea, not to borrow more money and send it to households. It's craziness.
Yeah.
And Europe held themselves hostage to this lunatic in Russia long ago. The Germans shut down their entire nuclear power fleet in response to the Fukushima reactor, which was sad, but again, no tsunamis are hitting Germany. Right, so talk about the fact that German people put up with that nonsense. Some economists I saw very briefly, I know you got to run. He commented that just numerically, because the population rise, more people in Germany today burn wood to heat their homes than they did in the Middle Ages as a result of green energy policies. So yeah, no, the crisis is here. America is slightly insulated, but these clowns have got to get reality because they are living a theoretical life. I go back to my Buddhism, alcoholism, and finance example, right? They're not accepting reality. They're not. I mean, we want to get to a green new world, wonderful, but we need to burn coal and oil to get there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm not, the whole politics thing, I do find what happens at the election time interesting because, just given all the stuff, it seems like a lot of folks are unhappy. But, I thought the same thing in 2020, and you look what actually happened, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. I just find it fascinating that the current administration is the one single-handedly responsible, in my opinion, at least causing the overnight spike in gas prices, and then try to act like, oh, well, actually, we need to come down. It's like, dude, you did an announcement, like you said, it was $2 before. You did an announcement, and our crude oil went to like 120 overnight, and the next day, gas here in Georgia, like again, low taxes, $4. It's like it's never come back down since. So that's the new normal.
Yeah, and they love it. They love it because they don't give a shit about the working man. And they lead. My wife put it beautifully years ago. She's like, I can't stand people that lead theoretical lives. It's what it is, right? I'm so completely not worried about the globe's inability to adapt to an incremental amount of carbon over the next 100 years if everyone's going to be impoverished before then. They don't care. We're going to see social unrest and wars and the rest of it. So this is so great that solar is going to save us. Well, I know what goes into solar panels and the environmental destruction caused by the mining of the materials that go into the solar panels. But they don't want to hear that. So I don't know. What are your main predictions? What do you think is going to happen in November?
I just, frankly, I know you're not supposed to talk about this, but I just think I think of a way it should go, especially down here. I'm going to be watching what happens with Georgia because there's a lot of nonsense happening. I think, frankly, I'm generally not a fan of the government, but here Georgia has probably been one of the better. It's been like Florida in terms of, they actually ran surpluses somehow during 2020.
Right.
And which is unheard of in this day and age of government being responsible. So I hope that continues. I hope all that stuff. But to me, I just look at it and say they're going to rig it, right?
Wow.
Because that's the momentum of where we're going. Why would you go against that? That's how I look at it. And all the stuff I saw locally here that maybe the world doesn't really know about. I mean, I saw lots of corruption, and I just, I hope we keep the same governor. I think it's very unlikely.
Wow.
Fundamentally, like looking at it from a top-down logical standpoint, I think that's what will happen. But I just think there's too much unforeseen stuff going on in the background to, make that possible. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, and I think we can close on that because it's if what I would hope everyone, and this is what I find somewhat terrifying, is sort of the blinkered view of people on either side of the political aisle, right? That I want to win no matter what. Careful, because if people don't believe that the system is fair and it works, that's really dangerous. That's really really dangerous.
Yeah.
Like Civil War 2.0. Like that's really dangerous. And so, whoever doesn't want to increase the transparency and not only fairness, but the appearance of fairness, worries me. It's not really about winning at all costs. If you win at all costs and the world decides no, that's a coup. I mean, it's dangerous stuff.
It is
dangerous stuff and whether or not they're dropping boxes in the middle of the night and the rest of it, any governor of any political persuasion should want to do absolutely everything possible to make sure that there are always 5 people watching every polling station, right?
Yeah.
Just from the point of view, you don't want to be accused of it looking shady, and it can. If people are getting Project Veritas is getting videos of vans full of ballots being dropped off by one driver at 2 a.m, that just raises the chances of fraud, right? Whether it's true or not, one driver, 2 a.m, that looks a lot worse than 4 drivers in broad daylight. Just does. So hopefully everyone remains calm and rational. And let's pray for gridlock. But anyway, Joshua, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate your time. I look forward to having you back. And until next time, as I tell everybody, turn off the mainstream media. They're lying to you. Tune in to hear guys like me and Joshua. So.
Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.